The unexpected return. Marcus Chin had seen 3 meteor showers, 2 solar flares, and 1 particularly aggressive space debris collision during his 5 years aboard orbital station Kepler, but nothing prepared him for the morning. Commander Vega burst into the engineering bay with her tablet glowing emergency red. "Chin, we have a situation," she said, her voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that meant someone very important was about to make his life complicated. Marcus looked up from the coolant manifold he was repairing, grease smeared across his forearm. "Let me guess. The recycling system is backing up again? I told maintenance that." An alien diplomatic vessel just dropped out of hyperspace. Unannounced. "They're requesting permission to dock, and they specifically asked for you by name." The wrench slipped from Marcus's fingers and clattered against the metal floor. "Me? Are you sure they didn't mean Marcus from astrophysics? Or Marcus from medical? There are like 4 of us on this station." Vega thrust the tablet toward him. On the screen, translated text glowed in standard English. "Request immediate audience with engineer Marcus David Chin, citizen of Earth, resident of North American sector, formerly of Portland region. Matter of cultural significance and historical bond obligation." Marcus felt his stomach drop into his boots. Historical bond obligation. Those 3 words triggered a memory he had buried under 15 years of education, career building, and convincing himself it had all been a strange dream. He was 10 years old again, crouching in the forest behind his grandmother's house, staring at the smoking wreckage of something that definitely wasn't from Earth. The craft was small, elegant, its metal shimmering with colors that hurt to look at directly. And crawling from the twisted opening was a girl. She wasn't human. Her skin held a faint luminescence, her eyes were too large and colored like amethysts, and her ears rose into delicate points that twitched at every sound. She was terrified, bleeding something that glowed silver, and when she saw him, she made a sound like wind chimes breaking. Marcus had done what any kid raised on adventure stories would do. He hid her in his grandmother's garden shed, brought her food, and used his allowance to buy bandages and antiseptic. For 3 days they communicated through drawings and gestures. She taught him her name, Lyra, by tracing symbols in the dirt. He taught her his by pointing at himself repeatedly until she mimicked the sounds. On the 4th day he heard the helicopters. Military. They had tracked her ship's descent. Panicked, Marcus did something incredibly stupid and incredibly sincere. He took his grandmother's old beading wire and twisted it into a crude bracelet, pressed it into Lyra's 3-fingered hand and said, "When we grow up, let's be friends forever. Let's always help each other." Like a promise. She had stared at the bracelet, then at him, and something in her expression shifted. She touched her forehead to his, a gesture he didn't understand but felt was important, and whispered something in her language that sounded like crystal bells. Then her people came. Ships appeared in the sky, visible even in daylight, and took her away. The military questioned him for hours. His parents grounded him for months. Eventually, everyone convinced him it was better forgotten. But here he was 15 years later, and apparently Lyra hadn't forgotten anything. "Chin? Marcus." Vega snapped her fingers in front of his face. "Are you listening? We need to know what this is about. The diplomatic corps is losing their minds. Do you have any idea why an alien commander would specifically request you?" Marcus swallowed hard. "I might have made a childhood promise to an alien girl that I didn't realize was legally binding in her culture." The engineering bay went silent. Every technician stopped working and turned to stare at him. Vega blinked slowly. "You what?" "It was 15 years ago. I was 10. She crashed near my grandmother's house and I helped her hide from the military. Before she left, I gave her a bracelet and said something about being friends forever when we grew up. I thought it was just kid stuff." "Kid stuff," Vega repeated flatly. "You made an interstellar friendship pact with an alien species we've been trying to establish diplomatic relations with for over a decade, and you thought it was kid stuff." In my defense, I was 10 and didn't know aliens took childhood promises seriously. Vega pressed her fingers against her temples. "Station Director Park is going to have an aneurysm. Get cleaned up. You're going to the docking bay. And Chin? Try not to accidentally start an intergalactic incident." 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in the main docking bay wearing his cleanest jumpsuit, which still had a stubborn oil stain near the collar. Around him, the station's entire diplomatic team had assembled, along with security personnel trying very hard to look non-threatening while being heavily armed. The alien vessel was unlike anything in the station's usual traffic. It moved with fluid grace, its hull rippling with patterns of light that seemed almost organic. When it docked, the connection was so smooth Marcus barely felt it through the deck plating. The airlock cycled. The door opened. and Lyra stepped through. Marcus's breath caught. She had grown tall, easily 6.5 feet, with the lean strength of someone trained for combat. She wore armor that looked like it was carved from starlight, and her long silver hair was bound in intricate braids. But her eyes, those distinctive amethyst eyes, were exactly as he remembered. Behind her came an entourage of officers and attendants, all wearing variations of the same elegant armor. They moved with military precision, but every one of them was watching Marcus with open curiosity. Lyra's gaze swept the docking bay and locked onto him immediately. For a moment, her formal expression cracked, and something vulnerable and relieved flickered across her face. "Marcus David Chin," she said, her voice carrying that same chime-like quality he remembered, though now it was deeper, more controlled. "You have grown." "So have you," he managed, his voice embarrassingly hoarse. "Significantly. Upward. You're very tall now." One of her officers made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Lyra's ears twitched in what he suspected was amusement. "I have returned," she continued, her tone becoming formal again, "to honor the resonance bond formed between us 15 solar cycles ago. As is my duty and my desire." The diplomatic team exchanged panicked glances. Director Park, a stern woman who had negotiated 3 separate trade agreements without breaking a sweat, stepped forward carefully. "Commander Lyra, we are honored by your presence. However, we must confess some confusion about this resonance bond. In human culture, childhood promises are generally not considered legally or culturally binding." Lyra's expression hardened. "In my culture, promises made in innocence are the most sacred. They are truth unfiltered by adult deception or political manipulation. When a child offers a bond, it is pure. To reject such a bond after it has been accepted is a grave dishonor." "I didn't reject anything," Marcus said quickly. "I just didn't know I was accepting something that would still matter 15 years later." Lyra turned to him, and her expression softened again. "You gave me this." She reached into a compartment in her armor and withdrew the wire bracelet. It looked exactly as he remembered, crude and uneven, except now it was housed in a protective crystal case. "I have carried it through training, through combat, through diplomatic missions across 7 systems. My family attempted to remove it from my possession, claiming it was worthless human trinket work. I refused. The council attempted to arrange other bonds for me. I refused. Because I made a promise to a human child who showed me kindness when I was alone and afraid." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Around him, he could see the diplomatic team's expressions shifting from panic to something that looked almost like sympathy. "Lyra," he said softly, "what exactly does this resonance bond mean in your culture? Because humans, we have a thing called marriage, and if that's what this is, we need to have a very long conversation about consent and cultural differences." Her ears flicked back in surprise. "Marriage? No. The resonance bond is not a mating claim. It is a connection between 2 souls who recognize each other as worthy of lifelong trust and mutual protection. It means we are bound by honor to support each other, to defend each other, and to maintain connection regardless of distance or circumstance. Among my people, it is the highest form of friendship." "Oh," Marcus said, relief flooding through him. "That's actually really beautiful." "However," Lyra continued, and Marcus's relief evaporated, "among my people, rejecting an established resonance bond is considered a declaration that the bond giver is unworthy and dishonorable. If you refuse me now, you will insult not just me, but my entire family line and, by extension, my people's honor." Director Park made a sound like a tea kettle beginning to boil. "So to be clear," Marcus said slowly, "if I say I don't want to honor a bracelet I made when I was 10, it could damage Earth's diplomatic relations with your entire species? It could start a war," one of Lyra's officers said bluntly. "At minimum, it would end all diplomatic negotiations for the next century." Marcus looked at Lyra, really looked at her. Beneath the commander's formal bearing, he could see tension in her shoulders, uncertainty in the way her fingers curled slightly inward. She wasn't just following duty. This actually mattered to her personally. "Can I talk to Lyra alone for a minute?" he asked. The diplomatic team erupted in immediate protest, but Lyra raised one hand and her officers fell silent instantly. "Yes," she said. "That is acceptable." They moved to an observation window overlooking the curve of Earth below. For a moment, neither spoke. "You really kept it all these years?" Marcus finally asked. "I did. You saved my life, Marcus. Your world wanted to dissect me or imprison me. You gave me safety and kindness with no expectation of reward. When you gave me this bracelet, I felt your sincerity. It resonated with my spirit. I knew even then that you were someone I wanted to know as an adult. And now you're back and everyone expects me to just accept this bond without question. No, Lyra said quietly. I expect you to choose freely. If you refuse, I will face consequences, yes. But I will not force a bond upon someone who does not wish it. That would corrupt the very purity that makes such bonds sacred. Marcus stared out at Earth, thinking about the scared girl in his grandmother's shed and the confident commander standing beside him now. Thinking about what it meant to honor promises and what it cost to break them. What if, he said slowly, I want to accept the bond, but on terms that make sense for both our cultures? What if we figure out what this actually means together, instead of just following ancient rules neither of us fully understands? Lyra's ears pricked forward, her eyes brightening. You would do this? You came across the galaxy because a 10-year-old kid gave you a twisted piece of wire and said he wanted to be your friend. That's either incredibly noble or slightly insane, and either way it deserves respect. Besides, I meant what I said back then. I just didn't know it would mean this much. For the first time since arriving, Lyra smiled. It was radiant and transformative, and Marcus realized with a start that he was in serious danger of actually liking this person, not just honoring a childhood memory. Then we have much to discuss, she said. My people have customs you must learn, and I know nothing of human bonding traditions. This will be complicated. Everything worth doing is complicated, Marcus replied. But I'm an engineer. I solve complicated problems for a living. Behind them, through the observation window, the diplomatic team was arguing frantically. On Lyra's ship, her officers were undoubtedly reporting this development to their superiors. And somewhere, bureaucrats on both sides were probably already drowning in paperwork. But standing there, looking at Earth with an alien commander who had crossed the stars to honor a childhood promise, Marcus thought that maybe complicated wasn't so bad. Maybe complicated was just another word for interesting. Okay, he said, turning to face her fully. Let's do this. Let's figure out what a resonance bond means when it's between a human and whatever your species is called. Velithian, she supplied. We are called Velithian. Velithian. Right. Let's figure out what a resonance bond means when it's between a human and a Velithian, and let's do it in a way that honors both our peoples. Lyra extended her hand, 3 long fingers spread in what he now recognized as a Velithian gesture of agreement. Then we have a new promise, Marcus David Chin. To build understanding between our worlds. He took her hand carefully, mindful of the strength he knew was there. To build understanding. And maybe to prove that childhood promises aren't always just kid stuff. Her ears twitched in clear amusement, and for just a moment, he saw the scared girl from his grandmother's shed overlaid with the confident commander she had become. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, this was going to turn into something remarkable. Part 2, Bridging Two Worlds. The conference room aboard orbital station Kepler had never been designed to host an interstellar diplomatic crisis. But over the next 72 hours, that was exactly what it became. On one side of the long table sat the human delegation. Director Park, 3 diplomatic advisors, a xenoanthropologist who had been pulled from her research station on Mars, and Marcus, who still felt absurdly out of place in his hastily issued formal uniform. On the other side sat Lyra and her officers, their starlight armor dimmed to a less intimidating glow, though their presence still filled the room with an otherworldly intensity. Between them sat a holographic display showing 2 very angry governing bodies. The Earth Coalition Council occupied the left screen, their faces ranging from confused to furious. The Velithian High Command occupied the right, their elegant features arranged in expressions that Marcus was learning to read as deeply displeased. This is unprecedented, High Commander Zethus declared, his voice carrying the harmonics that marked him as Lyra's direct superior. Commander Lyra has invoked an ancient bond with a human, and now that human proposes to rewrite the very nature of that bond? This is not how resonance works. With respect, Director Park replied, her diplomatic smile looking strained, your commander invoked a bond with a 10-year-old child who had no understanding of your cultural practices. Surely there must be precedent for situations where one party was uninformed. Ignorance does not void sincerity, another Velithian officer stated. The boy's intention was pure. He offered protection and eternal friendship. Commander Lyra accepted. The bond was sealed. Sealed how exactly? The xenoanthropologist, Dr. Ramirez, leaned forward with academic interest. What is the mechanism of this resonance bond? Is it psychological, spiritual, neurological? Lyra spoke for the first time in an hour, her voice cutting through the rising arguments. It is all of those things and none of them. When 2 Velithians form a resonance bond, we undergo a ceremony where our energy frequencies align. We become attuned to each other's emotional states across great distances. We can sense when the other is in danger or in need. It is a connection that transcends physical presence. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. Wait, you're telling me this bond is supposed to give us some kind of psychic connection? Because I haven't felt anything like that. No, Lyra said, turning to look at him with those striking amethyst eyes. Because the bond was never completed. You offered it as a child, I accepted it in my heart, but we never performed the ceremony. I have carried the intention for 15 years, but the bond itself remains dormant. The room fell silent. Even the arguing council members on the screens stopped mid-sentence. So what you're saying, Marcus said slowly, is that all of this, the diplomatic crisis, the potential for war, the entire problem, is based on a bond that doesn't actually exist yet? The intention exists, High Commander Zethus said firmly. That alone is sacred. Commander Lyra has structured her entire adult life around honoring this promise. She has refused other bonds, declined advantageous alliances, and now stands before two governments demanding they recognize something her heart knows to be true. If the human rejects her, he does not simply refuse a bond. He declares that her 15 years of loyalty and honor were worthless. Marcus saw Lyra's shoulders tense, saw the way her ears flattened slightly against her head. He was beginning to understand Valethian body language, and that was the posture of someone trying very hard not to show vulnerability in front of her superiors. That's not fair, Marcus said, his voice harder than he intended. You're putting the weight of an entire culture's expectations on a choice I made as a child, and then threatening interstellar consequences if I don't comply exactly as you want. That's not honoring sacred bonds. That's coercion. Marcus, Director Park said warningly, but he pressed on. No, listen. I understand that Lyra honored something important to her. I respect that deeply. But I'm being told I have two choices. Complete this bond exactly as Valethian tradition demands, or refuse it and insult an entire species. What about a third option? What about actually talking about what this bond could mean if we approach it as equals, not as someone fulfilling an obligation under threat? High Commander Zethus's expression darkened. You dare suggest that Valethian tradition should bend to accommodate human ignorance? I'm suggesting that maybe tradition needs to evolve when two completely different species try to connect, Marcus shot back. Your people have had resonance bonds for thousands of years, right? But how many of those bonds were with humans? How many were with any species outside your own? The silence that followed was telling. Dr. Ramirez pulled up data on her tablet. According to the cultural database, Valethian resonance bonds are exclusively practiced within their own species. There is no recorded instance of a cross-species bond in their entire documented history. Because it has never been necessary, Lyra said quietly. We have never encountered another species capable of understanding the depth of such a connection. Or maybe, Marcus said gently, looking directly at her, because your people never imagined that someone from another species could offer something equally valuable but different. Lyra, what do you actually want from this bond? Not what tradition says you should want. What do you want? Lyra stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her officers tensed, but she held up a hand to stop them. She walked to the observation window, her back to the room, and for a long moment she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Marcus had ever heard it. When I was 8 years old, I crashed on a hostile world. I was injured, terrified, and certain I would die. Then a human child found me, and instead of fearing me or betraying me, he protected me. He brought me food and medicine. He sat with me when I was scared. And when it was time for me to leave, he gave me something precious and asked for nothing in return except that we remember each other. She turned back to face the room, and Marcus saw moisture glistening in her eyes. For 15 years, I have wondered what kind of person that child would become. I have carried his gift and hoped that the universe would allow me to see him again. When I learned that humanity had joined the galactic community, I volunteered for every diplomatic mission, searched every human database until I found him. Lyra, High Commander Zethus said, his tone warning. No, she said firmly. I will speak truth. The High Command believes I am here to establish a formal resonance bond for political purposes, to create an unprecedented connection between our species that will give us insight into human consciousness and strengthen our alliance. But that is not why I came. I came because I made a promise to a child who showed me kindness, and I wanted to know if that kindness was genuine or simply childhood impulse. I wanted to know if Marcus David Chen was worth the 15 years I spent honoring his memory. She walked back to the table and stood directly in front of Marcus. You asked what I want. I want to know if the person you became is someone I can trust as deeply as I trusted the child. I want to know if you would still protect someone vulnerable even when it is inconvenient or politically complicated. I want to know if your offer of friendship was real. Marcus stood to meet her eyes, acutely aware that everyone in the room and on both screens was watching them. The offer was real. I meant it then and I stand by it now. But Lyra, I'm not the same person I was at 10. I'm flawed and uncertain, and I make mistakes constantly. I'm not some noble hero from a story. I'm just an engineer who tries to fix things and help people when I can. If you're looking for someone perfect to justify 15 years of loyalty, you're going to be disappointed. I am not looking for perfection, Lyra said. I am looking for authenticity. And in the past 3 days, you have argued with your own government on my behalf, stood up to my military superiors, and offered to rewrite tradition to find a path that honors both our peoples. That is the same spirit I saw in the child who defied his world's military to hide an alien girl in a garden shed. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Marcus saw Director Park's expression change from diplomatic concern to something almost like understanding. Even High Commander Zethus seemed to be reconsidering his position. What if, Dr. Ramirez said carefully, we approach this not as humans adopting Valethian tradition or Valethians compromising their values, but as two species creating something new together. A bond that incorporates elements of both cultures. Heresy, one of the Valethian officers muttered, but Lyra's ears pricked forward with interest. Explain, she said. Dr. Ramirez pulled up a new display. Valethian resonance bonds involve energy frequency alignment and emotional attunement. Humans don't have the same neurological capacity for that kind of connection, but we do have our own bonding traditions. Deep friendship, chosen family, partnerships built on mutual respect and support. What if we created a ceremony that acknowledges both? The Valethian commitment to lifelong connection and the human emphasis on chosen relationship and ongoing consent. Ongoing consent? High Commander Zethus looked confused. In human culture, Marcus explained, relationships aren't just sealed and permanent. They require continued choice, continued effort, continued commitment from both parties. If one person wants to end the relationship, they have that right even if it causes pain. We believe that a connection maintained by choice is stronger than one maintained by obligation. That sounds unstable, another Valethian officer said. It sounds like freedom, Lyra said softly. And perhaps that is what I have been seeking. Not just to honor an old promise, but to make a new choice, every day to maintain this connection. High Commander Zethus was silent for a long moment. You would create a hybrid bond? Something that has never existed. Yes, Lyra said firmly. Marcus is right. Tradition must evolve. And if I am to be the first Valethian to bond with another species, then perhaps I should also be the first to demonstrate that our traditions can adapt without losing their meaning. The Human Council members were whispering urgently among themselves. Director Park muted their audio for a moment, then unmuted. The Earth Coalition is willing to support this approach, provided both parties enter into it freely and with full understanding. We would want cultural mediators present, documentation of the new bonding protocol, and regular check-ins to ensure both parties remain comfortable with the arrangement. The Valethian High Command will need to deliberate, Zethus said, but Marcus noticed his tone had shifted from hostile to merely skeptical. This is unprecedented. Everything about this situation is unprecedented, Lyra said. Perhaps that is exactly why it matters. We claim to be an advanced civilization, but if we cannot adapt our traditions to honor genuine connection across species boundaries, then we are not as enlightened as we believe. Marcus felt a surge of respect for her courage. She was risking her position, her standing with her own people, to fight for something neither of them fully understood yet. I have a question, he said looking at Lyra. If we do this, if we create this new kind of bond, what happens when we disagree? What happens when the distance between our worlds makes things difficult? What happens if one of us changes in ways the other doesn't expect? Then we navigate those challenges together, Lyra said. Is that not what any meaningful relationship requires? You said connections maintained by choice are stronger. I choose to face unknown futures with you rather than honor empty tradition without you. Something warm unfurled in Marcus's chest, something that felt like the beginning of genuine friendship, maybe even something deeper given time. Okay, he said. Then let's do this right. Let's take the time to actually understand each other's cultures. Let's build this bond step by step, with mediators and translators and probably a lot of awkward conversations where we accidentally insult each other's deepest values. That sounds terrible, Lyra said, but her ears were high and her eyes were bright. I accept. Over the next 2 weeks they created something unprecedented. Dr. Ramirez worked with Velithian scholars to design a ceremony that honored both species. Marcus learned about Velithian energy work and meditation practices. Lyra studied human concepts of friendship, boundaries, and emotional communication. They met daily, sometimes in formal sessions with observers, sometimes just the two of them in the observation deck, talking about everything from childhood memories to professional dreams to the strange experience of being at the center of interstellar attention. Marcus learned that Lyra loved mathematics and poetry, that she had a dry sense of humor that translated poorly into standard but made him laugh anyway, and that she was deeply lonely in her role as commander. Lyra learned that Marcus had chosen engineering because he liked fixing things that were broken, that he missed Earth's forests but loved the stars, and that he was terrified of failing people who depended on him. They learned to read each other's body language, to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate across the gap of different biologies and cultures. It wasn't perfect. They argued about the role of duty versus personal choice. Marcus accidentally insulted her family lineage by suggesting traditions could be outdated. Lyra confused his need for personal space with rejection and had to learn that humans sometimes needed to be alone to recharge. But they kept choosing to try, kept choosing to understand, kept choosing each other. The ceremony, when it finally happened, was attended by representatives from both governments. It took place in the observation deck Marcus had come to think of as their space, with Earth visible below and stars stretching above. The Velithian scholars had designed a modified energy alignment process that wouldn't harm Marcus's human neurology. The human psychologists had contributed elements of intentional commitment and verbal consent. Lyra stood before him in ceremonial robes that shimmered like northern lights. Marcus wore formal Earth diplomatic attire and felt only slightly ridiculous. Marcus David Chin, Lyra said, speaking the words they had written together, "I choose you as resonance partner, adapted for our joined understanding. I promise to honor your autonomy while maintaining our connection. I promise to protect you not as obligation but as genuine care. I promise to continue choosing this bond every day for as long as we both wish it." "Lyra of the Velithian Star Fleet," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I choose you as resonance partner. I promise to respect your traditions while bringing my own perspective. I promise to support you not because I must but because I want to. I promise to keep learning who you are and choosing this connection for as long as it serves us both." The Velithian scholars activated the energy field, a gentle glow that surrounded them both. Marcus felt something, a warmth, a sense of presence that was distinctly Lyra. Not telepathy, not mind reading, but awareness. Like knowing someone was in the next room even without seeing them. "I feel you," he whispered. "And I you," Lyra said, her voice full of wonder. "This is different from traditional resonance, but it is real. It is ours." They completed the ceremony, and when it was done, both councils ratified the new protocol. Lyra and Marcus had created the first successful cross-species resonance bond, one that balanced Velithian tradition with human values, one that made space for growth and change and the beautiful complexity of true connection. In the weeks that followed, Marcus returned to his engineering duties, but now with Lyra as a frequent visitor. She extended her diplomatic mission, using the station as a base for human-Velithian cultural exchange. They worked together on joint projects, teaching each other's people, building bridges. Sometimes Marcus would be working on a particularly frustrating repair, and he would feel that gentle warmth that meant Lyra was thinking of him. Sometimes Lyra would be in difficult command meetings, and she would sense Marcus's steady support even across the station's distance. They had dinner together twice a week, exploring each other's cuisines with varying degrees of success. They watched Earth sunrises and debated philosophy and argued about the best way to organize technical manuals. They built a friendship that was deeper than childhood promises, stronger than obligation, and entirely their own. One evening, sitting in their observation deck with Earth turning slowly below, Lyra said, "Do you ever regret it? Accepting the bond?" Marcus thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I regret the pressure and the political mess and the fact that I'm now in 16 different xenoanthropology textbooks. But regret knowing you? Regret having you in my life? Never." "Good," Lyra said, her ears twitching in contentment. "Because I believe this is what the universe intended when it crashed my ship near your grandmother's house 15 years ago. Not a perfect bond, not a simple friendship, but something challenging and real and worth every moment of the journey. To complicated relationships," Marcus said, raising his coffee in a toast. "To choosing each other," Lyra replied, lifting her own cup of Velithian tea. "And somewhere between the stars and Earth, between two species learning to understand one another, a childhood promise transformed into something neither of them had expected but both of them valued." Not because they had to, but because they chose to, every single day. The bracelet still sat in its crystal case in Lyra's quarters, a reminder of where they had started. But next to it now sat a new item, a small metal sculpture Marcus had welded together from spare parts, depicting a human and a Velithian standing back to back, protecting each other, reaching toward the stars. It wasn't perfect. It was crooked and rough-edged and made from scraps. But it was real, it was intentional, and it was theirs. Just like the bond they had built together. And that, they both agreed, was exactly how it should be.